I am. Okay. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. And on behalf of the Local Government Commission, the California Water Institute at Fresno State, and myself, welcome to today's webinar. How do you run a Groundwater Sustainability Agency? A review of choices made by critically overdrafted subbasins. My name is Chris Austin. I'm otherwise known as Maven, and I publish the California Water News website, Maven's Notebook. For those who aren't familiar, Maven's Notebook is a website devoted to California water news. The website is updated 6 days a week with the latest water news from around the web, including newspaper articles, editorials, commentaries, blogs, press releases, you name it, as well as breaking news whenever it occurs. I supplement that with coverage of state agency meetings, workshops, conferences, and events. And I think that this unique combination of both original content as well as the aggregated news content from around the web makes Maven's Notebook your complete source for California water news. I invite you to check it out at mavensnotebook.com. And while you're there, be sure to sign up for free daily email service to get the latest news delivered to your email box every morning. And there's a weekly version for those who might want a little less emails or just a recap of the week's news. I also publish a website called the Groundwater Exchange, which is a website that collects and organizes resources for SGMA implementation from DWR, the State Water Board, NGOs, and others. There are pages on projects and actions such as groundwater recharge, as well as pages on avoiding undesirable results, a video gallery, an intro to SGMA in both English and Spanish, and a bi-monthly SGMA implementation newsletter. I invite you to check it out at groundwaterexchange.org. Starting in March, the Groundwater Exchange and the Local Government Commission will host informal office hour sessions, which will feature experts to answer your questions. On March 1st, we'll have groundwater expert Dr. Thomas Harder, and on March 15th, we'll have executive facilitator Lisa Butler and other Stantec facilitators. We're currently planning future office hour sessions, and we'd like to hear from you. If you have any topics or ideas for future office hours, let us know. Just email Maven at mavensnotebook.com. Now, a little bit of housekeeping. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be posted at Maven's Notebook and the Groundwater Exchange. A follow-up email with a link to the recording and webinar resources will be sent to all registrants in the next day or two. The email will include a link to sign up to be notified of upcoming webinars, including the office hour sessions. And links to resources mentioned by our speakers will be posted in the chat. And if you have a question, please enter it in the Q&A box available at the bottom of the screen. And now I'm going to hand it over to our moderator for today, Lisa Butler. Take it away.
Thanks, Chris. And Laura, I'll go ahead and have you pull up our slides for today as well. Just some background while she's pulling up the slides. I, like many of the people, I'm looking at the people that have signed in, and the vast majority of people that are here today have been engaged in working on SGMA. And as many of you know, I'm also noticing the number of researchers that we have online with us as well. As many of you already know, this was an extraordinary experiment, deciding to all of a sudden create a bazillion new levels of government that never existed before. And it all had to happen very quickly. So one of the things that caused this particular project to get started was the idea that we needed a simple inventory. We needed to document and create a solid location where information about all these initial decisions, how they were made, what decisions were made, could be captured, and that particular baseline of information could then be used to create a point of reference as we started to look at the success of the GSP processes, the success of the various GSAs in achieving their sustainability goals. So with that, that's a little bit about this. You're going to hear a wonderful session from Fresno State and the amazing work that they've been doing. I'll go ahead and have you go to the next slide, Laura. We also do want to thank everyone that has been involved. Chris had a chance to introduce them already. So here's what we're going to do today. We'll go to the next slide. We'll do some real quick introductions of our speakers, and then overview and and talk a little bit about the background of the document. Then we'll move into the actual report, the document, and how you can use that document, what's in it. then any questions that you have, and then a final little piece from California Water Institute at Fresno State. There are a lot of exciting things going on there, so they'd like to share with you more about that. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Laura. And Laura, your fellow speakers, you're going to also be introducing Sarge Green, right?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, great. And tell us a little bit about you.
Hi, I'm Laura Ramos, Associate Director at the Research and Development Division at California State University, Fresno, and I've been here for about 20 years.
Great. Well, take it away, Laura.
Thank you, Lisa. And should I introduce Sarge? Sarge, do you want to introduce? Yeah, Sarge, would you want to introduce yourselves before I go on?
Sure. Sarge Green. I'm with the California Water Institute and the Center for Irrigation Technology, and I've been at Fresno State for 14 years.
Thank you. And you're here.
I was going to say, we probably could have said that Sarge doesn't need introduction.
That is true. And you'll be hearing from Sarge shortly. And so I want to say thank you to Lisa and to Chris for putting this together, and her for helping us share this report and all of the information that we put together for all of you today. And so first I'll go over some of the goals of the report, which were to create a summary of all of the governance structures and strategies that were implemented in the 21 critically overdrafted groundwater basins. The second was to document a historical process of how 125 GSAs began to implement SGMA, and how we accomplished this, or how we put together the information and the methodology we used, was to review a lot of SGMA statutes and regulations. We then moved on to a literature review. We selected 10 papers out of 34 publications, and we reviewed all of the publications to make sure that they were relevant to the topic. Once those were selected, they were reviewed for information to be included in the report, as well as helped with the knowledge needed to create the questions that were part of the interviewing process. Speaking about the interviewing process, that was the second part of what we used for development of this report. And it was a two-part Zoom interviews, and they were conducted in the beginning of 2021 by Sarge Green. And the first part of the interviews were pre-prepared questions that were posted to the interviews by Sarge. But then the next part were groups that received more of open-ended interviews and discussions from all of the participants. And you'll hear about I'm sorry?
Oh, go ahead, Laura. I was going to make a comment about the literature review, but go ahead.
Okay, sorry. I was just going to mention that you will hear from Sarge Green about who were the interviewers and what he learned from those. That is also in the report. Lisa, what did you want to?
Oh, I just was going to mention, there are a number of researchers that are actually on the call. I'm looking at the list of people. So some of you who are on the call, I can tell you your papers were actually some of the documents that were reviewed for this report in advance of that. And also the other interesting thing that I think you did, Sarge, and you and I talked about this, was you pulled together a very large list of the literature, and then you winnowed it down to kind of focus on the key topics that you thought would be most appropriate for this particular piece. So even though there are some particular cited papers, it was actually even a more exhaustive search than might otherwise be reflected in the document. Is that accurate, Sarge?
Yes. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Laura. Yes.
Yes, we actually reviewed 34 publications first in the starting of this process, and then we dwindled it out to 10. So yes, there was 34 that were part of it, and then 10 that are highlighted in the reference section of the publication.
Thank you.
Did I miss anything, Sarge?
The only thing I can add is that we also had a lot of interaction with the SGMA portal, because one of the things that this report has done is encapsulated everything that's in the SGMA portal into one location. Hopefully it works. The spreadsheet has all of the GSAs in the critically overdrafted basins and their GSPs. So that's one of the things that we're going to offer as part of this activity.
Thanks, Sarge.
Thank you, Sarge. And so, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to tell you, those were the goals and methodology, but now we're going to move into actually telling you more about the report. And so the approach that was taken on the report was moving from the very general to the very specific. So we do talk about the Sigma framework and the steps to becoming a GSA, but for purposes of today's presentation, we're not going to go over those, but we're going to focus on the development of those GSPs and some more information about those and the governing structure. So there are some sections, or the beginning part, the Sigma framework and the steps to becoming a GSP, that are explained in a bottom-up approach from Sigma, and they describe the GSAs, their powers, their regulations, responsibilities, their government options, as well as who's eligible to be a GSA, what are the responsible agencies, as well as what are some of their options for governance, including joint powers agreements, which you'll hear a lot about during this presentation, referred to as a JPA. What are some of the agencies, memorandum of agreements, and all of the different agreements that were an option. So in the report, you will read about some of those. And like I said, for purposes of today, we're going to not go into detail about how to become a GSA or the framework, but how they were developed. And so the report will go into details about how do you develop a GSP. And so there were some agencies, or they had an option of having an individual GSA with their own GSP. And one of those that there is one example of a city that did their own GSP, but there were also counties that did their own GSPs, but there were a lot of irrigation and water districts that created their own GSP. But those weren't the only ones. There were also individual GSAs that created their own GSP, special districts, and then there were multiple agencies that combined with creating a JPA to create their GSP and merge together. There were some governance options that combine multiple GSPs within and across basins. And there was also governance option for combining agencies with multiple GSPs within a boundary. And they did that by creating coordinating agreements, as well as a combination of GSAs by JPAs. So many acronyms.
Yeah, and we're gonna call that a joint powers authority.
Joint Powers Authority. Okay, thank you. And so in the report, we go into details about what each one of these are, what were some of the options, but also there's a very detailed Appendix A that you will actually hear a little bit more about, an interactive process for using that Appendix A from Sarge. But for now, I'm going to mention that the static report, or the PDF report, does include a summary of all of the GSAs and how and where, what form they use to collaborate and coordinate those efforts. And so you, in the report, you see an explanation of each one, as well as which agencies did what, and then a summary in the Appendix A. Next, I will hand it over to Sarge, who will talk to you about the interviewing process and the stakeholders' perspectives and how that went, and who he interviewed, what he interviewed, but a detailed list of who was interviewed is actually in the report. So Sarge, I'm going to give you remote access to control the PowerPoint.
Okay. And next page. Where is it? Well, it's not. Oh,
there you go. There you go.
Hey, I didn't press hard enough on the key. Got an old keyboard. Well, welcome everybody. Yeah, this is an interesting experience. Having been a manager of a small agency, my heart went out to these people who had to go through this process, because it's quite complicated and yeah, and a lot of permutations of doing the same thing. So we wanted to make sure that we were, talking to the right people about what they really thought, how the process went, what was right, what was wrong. So we interviewed 19 people, including technical experts, elected officials, ecosystem and environmental justice representatives, and the academic and research and policy community. So, for example, in the technical experts, we interviewed a couple of people that were very actively involved in the GSP process. So they were spending a lot of hours, and it was quite a process. And there were a couple of little gems that they passed on to me. One of the important things is that their audience, their customer, their client had to have a certain level of knowledge to be able to understand what they were taking them through. And the capability of some of the GSAs and their boards of directors or even their managers varied considerably. And so one of the things that they had to do in using their data and developing reports is they had quite an investment in talking to these people, to taking them through and educate them quite a bit about groundwater, about what it is that the data meant or said. So they were a very important part of the interview process because they were the ones working on a day-to-day effort, and it was arduous for them. I think you all probably know that there's, and I have a note in here that there has been a shortage of people to be able to address all of the work that came out of this, and yet continue on with the work in many instances of day-to-day things that, like irrigation districts, had to conduct their regular business. So it was quite an interesting venture and adventure for the consulting companies. Quite frankly, they did a bulk of the work. There weren't too many, if I can recall, any where staffs alone did any of the GSP development. And one of the important things about that was, and they all acknowledged, what it was extremely helpful with the Department of Water Resources financing or assisting with financing on a lot of that work. Elected officials, we did talk to some boards of supervisors. I think you know that one of the responsibilities was specifically identified for counties was to cover areas that had no other eligible jurisdiction. So if there wasn't an irrigation district or a resource conservation district or a water district with some capabilities, or a city that had coverage, then the counties were kind of the default. Created some controversy in one particular county, I recall, Kern County. County stepped up to start with, and they received so much, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. There was a lot of dissonance in Kern County, and the county board of supervisors decided to back out and kind of left some of the white areas in the lurch, and then the other agencies had to step up and figure out a way to cover them, and it all worked out. But I think
we have some folks here that are not Sigma junkies. So
okay.
A wide area is what?
White area is where there's no other agency coverage that's a GSA eligible to do the work. So white areas where they're just groundwater pumping and nobody overlying them with any capability under the GSA law to take the responsibility for that area. So it was passed on to the county. A lot of counties stepped up. In fact, a lot of counties now have very good water resource directors and staff in multiple departments to be able to pitch in and help out. So not only are counties involved in GSAs from the standpoint of their area, but they also have set GSAs up. One in particular working with right now is, I think Madera County has 220,000 acres that had no other coverage that is are in GSAs that they are administering. So we talked to a couple of key county representatives, one in San Joaquin and one in Fresno County, and to get their perspective on what they thought about the process. And obviously, they both thought it was a very difficult and arduous, but that the GSAs, in their mind, it did, under the circumstances, a pretty good job, but they did have some serious concerns. And not surprisingly, county representatives were concerned about the long-range costs, not just the cost of operating the GSA, but the potential costs of the loss of productive farmland because of the need to fallow to meet the allocation strategies where overdraft was causing the GSAs and their GSP to cause demand reduction. So counties are very concerned then about the economic impact of losing that ground. there's going to be alternatives, obviously, and every county's got a little different bent on which one they probably like. You may have heard that the Kern County is very heavily involved in solar, so maybe they already have a heads up on some of the other counties in terms of they got policies in place and agreements and capabilities to deal with the solar community. Ecosystem and environmental justice people, clearly they had some concerns. While some of them recognize that the GSAs did do as much as they can, there were 3 areas that both were still very concerned about. The one that we've all heard about the most is probably the most common complaint and has had various iterations since the initial efforts, and that was communications and outreach. A lot of them didn't feel that their communities were being adequately talked to understand and then deal with the issues associated with their communities, whether it was rural water or whether it was groundwater dependent ecosystems or whether it was surface water under the influence of groundwater. Those kinds of things were not communicated very well. And especially they were concerned about environmental justice, were concerned about dry wells and individual domestic wells. And of course, the NGOs were, as I mentioned already, concerned about the environmental NGOs, concerned about groundwater dependent ecosystems and surface water inputs from groundwater because it sustains the environment. So those things I think are still a work in progress, although I would like to say and hope everybody agrees that one thing that has improved, as I mentioned, it's become iterative, is that a lot of them have gotten better at communications and outreach. Better communications and outreach plans have been built. And I credit that a lot to the facilitators, Lisa's group, that have helped a lot of the organizations improve those particular parts of the efforts that the GSAs are doing. The academics and researchers and policy experts, obviously they focused on what it is that their area of research was. But what I could say is they were a lot more circumspect than I thought they would be, and a lot more complimentary. Almost all of them recognized that this is an iterative process overall, and that is that it's going to take some time to get this thing done right, and that it's going to get better each go around. One of the other things that they talked about, let's see, I'm going to jump to the next slide because I'm going to start talking about what some of the recommendations were. So overall, they all had some specific things that they thought was really important in terms of all the interviewees. And this is the way they kind of stacked out. Leadership was the #1 issue they thought in terms of the future for success, was the JPAs and the GSAs that were individuals or irrigation districts, whatever they were, if they had good leadership and good management that was likely to have a good GSA, good processes for dealing with the issues, including the public, and then pretty good attempts at the GSP. If the leadership was a little behind the curve or took a different tact in that they thought they could do it all, then it seemed that those were the ones that they thought would be less successful. So that leadership thing was probably the #1 issue then in terms of future success that they thought. And trust was the other. Trust was linked to leadership. If the community felt that the leadership wasn't adequate and was not really thinking about all of the responsibilities that they have, there was less trust. So the two were linked. So trust and leadership became pretty important in terms of what findings in the interview. Data availability was another biggie. That was mostly the technical people. They did recognize that they had some data to deal with or work with in many of the areas, but there was quite a few areas, and I think we all know this, that there were some significant gaps. Wells are individually owned, and to qualify to be able to put it into the GSP database and use it for information and characterizing the groundwater, it had to meet certain criteria. And so they're still working on that, many of the areas of the critically overdrafted basins. Some are better than others. Some have been around a long time, I'd like to point to Pajaro. Pajaro was one of the alternate plans over on the coast in the Watsonville area. And that one passed with flying colors in the alternate plan process. And they have had a long time program over there. The other one, of course, was Fox Canyon, because Fox Canyon has been around as a special district for a long time. So, you know, there was, it depended on the geographic area in terms of data availability, and some areas were better and some had some serious gaps and problems.
So Fox Canyon's down near Ventura?
Yeah, near Ventura, correct. It's in Ventura County. Costs of governance, grants helped tremendously to get the kicked off everything. There's no question about it that without the DWR help on GSP development and all that, that was great, and it's really helped a lot. However, the caveat is that what's going to happen next? Now that they're in implementation, they've got to start figuring out projects, because that was one of the big elements in the GSPs is what are our projects? And they had to submit project lists to try to show their interest and commitment to ultimate sustainability. Well, those projects have quite a cost. And the GSAs, many of them recognize that, and they had to then figure out how to pony up. And some have already gone through the tax process. As everybody knows, it's very difficult to add costs to landowners these days in California because of some constitutional amendments that we have that says you have to take it to a vote, whether it's Proposition 218 or the other one was 25, whatever the differences are, depending on the agency, they still have to ask the landowners for approval to be able to spend money. So that is one of the interviewees says that's going to be still an impediment in some cases if the electorate gets a little crazy and decides to turn down the financing. How are the GSAs going to come up with the money to be able to meet the goals of the GSP? One of the real interesting things that we found was that it seemed to me that looking at the formation of the GSAs, a lot of them formed around existing agreements and partnerships that they had already worked together. And I can give you an example of a couple. The Delta Mendota Water Authority is the large water supply organization for a lot of the western portion of the San Joaquin Valley. And that Delta Mendota subbasin is critically overdrafted. And the Delta Mendota act as a facilitator and an aggregator for almost the entire area, with the exception of Westlands Water District. So those agreements and being part of that organization then shaped how those GSAs got together and then developed their, 7 GSPs, I believe. I understand that maybe they perhaps that wasn't a good idea to do that. I don't know what their letter came out to look like yet. I haven't seen it. But as you all know, the letters finally on the 2020 submitted GSPs have been coming out over the last few days or so.
Sarge, the group may not know that. We have people here that are not even from California that are on the line with us right now.
Oh, okay.
So just
go ahead.
Or do you want me to jump in real fast?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So essentially, the GSPs that we're talking about right now have been in the process of being reviewed by the California Department of Water Resources. And there's sets of criteria that the department's using to determine the adequacy of the groundwater sustainability plans. The critically overdrafted subbasins, which were the focus of this particular report, are just now beginning rolling out over the last couple of weeks. Starting to receive information back from the department as to the adequacy of their plans. And some of the agencies, a smaller number, have learned that their plans were considered adequate based on the criteria, and others were found to have some inadequacies. And the letters that Sarge is referring to are letters that people have been receiving about the inadequacies and what will need to be done to provide some additional augmentation of the reports to meet requirements. So he's making mention right now of the fact people are getting the letters. And by the way, I'll just add, that's one of the reasons I think this document is incredibly useful, because we're gonna now be able to compare and contrast different decisions that were made against results that are happening in the GSP process. Take it back, Sarge.
You bet. There were quite a few existing groundwater jurisdictions. I already mentioned Pajaro Valley Water Management Agency and Fox Canyon down in Ventura County. But a lot of them were special districts, but there were also adjudicated areas. And adjudicated areas are interesting because while they've been allocating groundwater amongst some users, it may or may not fit the current required jurisdictional area, being a subbasin, a hydrologic unit of geologic note, or a basin. So there's going to have to be some work, I think, in the adjudicated areas to conform them to Sigma a little bit. So it's going to be an interesting process to see what happens as a result of those adjudicating areas marrying up with the balance in their basins. But the special districts included ones that have been around some time, but there were several new ones that formed that went to the California legislature and said, hey, we want to do this as a special district instead of just as an individual GSA managed located with the boundary of maybe an irrigation district or a number of irrigation districts, or forming a joint powers exercise or authority. And so they went in and got in under the wire, I guess you could say, because I think it had to be done by 2017. And one of them is the San Joaquin River Exchange Contractors decided to form a special district. So that's in the central San Joaquin Valley with some of the oldest water rights in the San Joaquin Valley, the Miller and Lux districts around Mendota to Los Banos, and then a little further up north. So interesting that they took that tack, but it's worked for them. So more power to them. They'll operate their GSP through their special district instead of as an agreement amongst the GSAs on known as a coordination agreement. But nonetheless, it's another way of doing it. Yeah, and the cost of implementation I mentioned already was something that a lot of people recognize might be an issue in the future. The ongoing efforts will probably require more tax elections, even though some have already done it and have some income. I don't necessarily believe the income that they have designated thus far is going to reach the level of being able to build all of their projects. Some may get started on their projects. And when I talk about projects, what we're talking about is things like groundwater recharge, either using floodwater or and using the ag lands is called AgMAR, agricultural managed aquifer recharge. And so one of the things that's going on right now is we're still trying to figure out where the best places are, because you have to have both the surface area, the soils have to be the right quality, and then you also have to have connectivity right down to the deeper groundwater table. So a lot of technical work going on that in that area right now. But then once they've got that figured out, then they have to figure out how to convey water to the areas. So there's going to be a considerable amount of project expense. This education and training piece came out as something that's a pretty important tool because, as mentioned early on, a lot of the success depends on leadership. So we need leadership training, but we also need a little more understanding by the public about groundwater. It's a very difficult subject for people to understand. It's not like a dam and a reservoir. You can't see it. And so it's complicated to some degree, but I think it can be done. I think that's kind of one of the missions of our organization here is how do we educate the public better? In fact, in an earlier discussion today, I was a panelist in another conference, and that was one of the questions. Why don't people have more concern about water if we have all these problems? Well, if you turn on the tap and it comes out, it may not be very important to you, but here in California, it is important, and so we need to do a better job. It was fairly unanimous that all of the interviewees agreed that that is part of what we need to do better in the future. Integration is also another one. Several people caught on to this, including the part of the academic pool and the technical people, and that is in the rush to do the work, whether it was forming the GSA and then to develop the Groundwater Sustainability Plan. And even though we're 7 years out, that's still a fairly tight time schedule in the big picture in terms of doing big things with water. Integration was kind of a missing link in some cases. There should have been more interaction with water and environment organizations, was one of the suggestions, whether it's talking more about how to do a better job using the Central Valley Project or the State Water Project to meet future goals, working with the Corps of Engineers, Fish and Wildlife Service, and then the NGO organizations themselves to work on some of these things. And then there were actually specific programs that need better integration that have some of the same exact goals, slight bent, but it's to improve groundwater. And specifically in the coast, we have the Central Coast has an agricultural return flow program, permitting program, because there's high nitrates in the groundwater in the Salinas Valley. The San Joaquin Valley has the irrigated lands program by the Central Valley Water Quality Control Board, as well as the salt plan called Central Valley Salts, Salinity Alternatives, and technology process. But anyway, one of the things that came out of those is you have to have nutrient management plans under the irrigated lands program in both the Central Coast and in the San Joaquin Valley, as well as the Sacramento Valley for that matter. But also under CV salts, they've already mapped high nitrate priority zones. And they have water zone management zones then that where they're already giving out bottled water or kiosks or looking for treatment for the nitrate for either domestic wells or small water systems. So those weren't necessarily coordinated real well, nor was it coordinated real well with a lot of the larger agencies that are involved in water supply and water management. So, but once again, it was a matter of time. And I just got a note, my internet is unstable. Okay. All
right. Well, keep going, Sarge, and we can have Laura advance the slides as well.
Yeah. Iteration. Time to get things done. I mentioned it. And last was the talent pool. We need more people in the water industry. We need to fill the gaps and to ensure our future by having a lot more young people. So, hello, take it over, Laura. Oh, is this mine, Laura? I guess it is.
Yeah, so now we're going to talk to you about how do you use this report. And so I mentioned a very cool Excel list that can be sorted. And so Sarge is going to walk you through a little bit and give you an example of how it's used.
Okay, pull it up. So here is the, as Lisa said, the Sigma DWR portal encapsulated into one spreadsheet. And we're going to try and keep this up to date. So if you find broken links, please let Laura or I know. You're going to have our access to our emails and contact information so we can fix it, because we're going to do this quarterly, and we're going to add the new GSA, GSPs that were the medium priority. So you can see what we can do. This link should be included already, and I'm going to go to one right now and make sure that it works. And there we are. I'm in the Cuyama Basin, which is between the valley floor in Kern County over to Santa Barbara, San Luis Obispo, Ventura County. It's a closed basin, and this is what they put together. And it was one of the first ones that got a negative letter from the California Department of Water Resources, and they're already redoing everything down there. I don't know, it may be that they're, I know one, the Borrego one, they've gone into a stipulated agreement. And of course, Indian Wells Valley was another one on the map that's going into litigation, as I understand it.
So Sarge, I'm gonna just let you know, there's been a really interesting conversation in the chat about how the incomplete plans are being characterized. So when we say things like negative or something like that, the actual process was one of it's complete or it's not complete. So I just wanted to flag that rather than a negative letter, although I'm sure the people that received the letters had a reaction that was probably not the best day they've had.
Yeah, I'm thinking like an old water district manager. You know, if I get a letter like that, I think, well, I didn't do very well. What's my grade? You know, but you're absolutely right. The department has characterized it. Hey, you've got room for improvement. You did a lot of things right, but here's where you need to definitely, we don't think you rose to the level of completeness or appropriateness in this particular area. You're absolutely right. That's the way to characterize it, and that's the way I hope it gets done.
That's good. But I'm going to jump in here because we're starting to get a little short on time. I've got a ton of questions coming in. I want to make sure we can do that. So just real quickly then, for the people that are watching online, this document is an Excel spreadsheet that takes everything from the portal and has hot links to take you to various places. So if you're a researcher in particular, or just someone who's trying to figure out what did some of the other sub-basins do, this is an amazing resource because you don't have to search up and down. It's all listed. What did they do? Did they have a JPA? Did they have a combined GSAs? You know, whatever their structure was, here's what's going on with their plan. Did they submit one GSP or multiple? How did they do that? It's all here in one location. You can, see who you would call. You can go over, like, just to follow up. I know a lot of the people on this phone are just in the middle of this. And so this is you have the ability to just kind of look at here's who you call, here's the email for that. And this will really help you as you're trying to do any kind of a comparative analysis or try to look at the way that you've structured something and whether or not you might want to change it. So I hope I summarized that okay. Was there more that the two of you wanted to hop into with this particular document?
No.
Yes. Oh, sorry. I do. That there's actually a README tab, so that if what is in each column, an explanation of each. There is a sub sheet that explains how to do it, and then there's the two governance matrix, and just like the report, it went from the big picture to the smaller picture. So it starts with basin. So if you want to filter by basin and then find out by basin, but then you can go by GSA or GSP. So you can sort any way you want. You can either start from the detailed to the big or big to the detailed. And then there's the README.
Super.
And there was a chat, Lisa, that said, can you resort by irrigation district? And, I guess that would be a word search, but it is sortable. So I don't know whether it would do that kind of a sort, but it might.
Yeah, it probably will, just if you take a look, because if you look on the other corner, it says what they are. It says what kind of a jurisdiction they are. So you could sort by irrigation district. This is completely sortable spreadsheet. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. And I'm only interrupting because I've got so many questions and we need to take some questions.
Yeah, we're done.
All right.
Let's go.
All right, we can go to the next slide then. You could just, we'll get you that reference stuff just back and we'll come into some of the questions. So I see, Chris, are we able to we have somebody that has a hand up. Do we just open mic for them or how do we do that?
Yeah, if you can,
okay.
Yeah.
Judy, go ahead. And if-
No, I appreciate the overview and very consistent with my understanding and appreciate the case studies and the work that's been done on this.
Great. And Judy's been out in the trenches, so she knows of what she speaks. All right, we had a question really early on about the literature review, and you mentioned that you'd looked at 34 and there were 10 reference. Someone was just curious to know if you could let them know what the remaining reports were that you looked at. I think I saw a list of those reports somewhere. So is that something that's in the document or is that something we would provide separately?
It's not in the document, only the 10 used for that document were referenced, but we do have a list of what they were. So I can very easily put that together. Great.
So if somebody wants to drop Laura a note, that's the information about that is actually in the PowerPoint. We'll make sure her email gets into the chat. So if you'd like to have that, they'll be happy to provide that. All right, there was a question that we got about there was some interest in the technical piece of it. So some of the other people that are working in this are noticing a lot of concerns with the sort of technical abilities from modeling, groundwater modeling, and that kind of thing. Was that something that was hit on pretty hard, Sarge, or was that more of a light touch in your review? Yeah,
that was more of a light touch because groundwater modeling is in my estimation, still kind of dependent on the data. And if you didn't have good data, I'm not sure that you can build the best model. Now, there's CV2, CHM or whatever, and then there's the ModFlow and others. But, you know, if you don't have the data to really operate it properly, then, so that kind of got the feeling from everybody that we really want to get our data sets in better shape to be able to put together a really good, understandable model. Otherwise, you're doing a lot of interpolating. And so I think some modelers would disagree with me, but the people I think in the GSAs and on the ground, you know, they're wanting to make sure that if it's going to predict something, that it's got some degree of reliability, especially when they're telling their people, well, we're going to only allocate you so much. So I think the modeling piece needs to be moving forward, but I think most have been recalcitrant because of the data issue.
Okay, great. There's a question someone asked about human capital. And this is something that has come up in some of the other studies. To what extent was the goodwill that existed, the human capital, how did that play into this process?
Yeah, and that was one of the areas, if you're talking about, for example, being able to communicate with your entire constituency. And some people did a good job and some people didn't do a very good job at all. And so I think that was, like I said, one of the areas there's been more investment in that more recently. And I think people are getting better at it, but there's still probably some people out there that are less interested in doing that. They may have a fairly small audience or, you know, they just don't have enough oversight yet. I think one of the ways that this is an important piece that I have yet to offer, I think the real area that's going to be very important is implementation of the coordination agreements. Because once you have to negotiate under the coordination agreements for a subbasin, that really brings in all of the elements, I think, of the GSP process, including communications and outreach. If you don't, as a subbasin, have a good coordination, communications and outreach effort to reach all your constituents, I think you're going to continue to have problems. In fact, one of the things I see is that because the coordination agreement is so important on a subbasin basis, that we may eventually see some mergers. There's too many GSAs out there. I'll be the first one to say it. I mean, that spreadsheet is great, but it's a monster. And I think hopefully we'll have fewer of them in the future when people, their minds finally come around the concept that we need to operate this as a hydrologic unit, not necessarily for our own purposes.
Okay, I know one of the findings that you had, Sarge, was that one of the drivers or the predictors of what people chose were just what they've been doing. So to the extent there was cooperation, and to the extent people went it alone, they went alone. So to what extent did any of these mention to you that they had actually looked at the enhanced infrastructure finance district processes and some of that? Did that come into play at all as people were looking at financing?
Yes, in fact, it was one of the supervisors that brought that up and said, we need to do more of that because it's a way to spread and to make and get investments. It might even get private money. And JPAs have the capacity to do that. JPAs can finance things. And while there's some responsibility from the individuals as partners, they can do the financing and they can do the legal and everything as an independent organization. So I think that is what he was talking about, is that EIFDs and all those other types of organizations need to be in the mix to be able to be successful.
Okay, I'm going to just notice we got a couple of comments that were somewhat specific, like someone asking for an assessment of an individual GSP that had been approved and what the thoughts were. And then I had another one about the recourse that a grower might have if they were in a wide area and were not having representation. So your report really didn't go into that sort of thing. I just want to honor the fact that we received the questions, but yours was a little bit more of a sort of a clinical review. So rather than an editorial one. Yeah, so for those of you who asked the question, I don't want to avoid the question. I'm just explaining why we're not answering it. Okay, then let me move on down to so there was a question about seeing which irrigation districts fall into which GSA. I think you answered that in when we looked at the spreadsheet about the sorting. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And also the question, how many GSAs are actually in all the high priority basins? Do we know what the number is?
125.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, that was a pop quiz. See if you knew what you're talking about. All right. So did you do any review of how the GSP implementation costs were allocated among the participating GSAs, such as groundwater pumping, population, acreage? I think you actually did look at that a little bit, right, Sarge?
Yes, that is a column where there's some representative examples. It wasn't exhaustive, but where I saw that type of information was available, there's some links to some people that how they did that, so that you can see how they did. Some did on acreage, some did on costs rather than any other metric. So there was a number of different ways that they took action, and they memorialized them in either their GSA, either a resolution or as a paper that they put together. So there's different ways that they did it. Yeah, so there are some indications of how some people did those.
Great, thanks. There was also a question about the governance structures in kind of what they took into account. So for example, what this person's asking, did they look at overdraft plus drought plus climate? Was that something that you looked at, or is there a way that could reference back to your document to get a feeling for that?
No, we didn't do that because I think that's inherent somewhat in the agreement with the Department of Water Resources that the GSP had to meet certain requirements and checklists. And I think climate was one of the issues that you had to deal with. But I did not get in that level of detail of review of the GSPs to make sure that it made sense or whatever it is that they put together. That was part of the critique, I think, that we're going to see in these letters.
Okay, great, thank you. So we do still have time for maybe one or two more questions, but while we're doing that, I'm going to turn this over to Charles. And Charles, ask you to introduce yourself and tell people what's in store for Fresno State and what the group that are listening today can expect.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. So some of you may have noticed that Laura introduced herself as the part of the Research and Education Division. CWI recently went through a reorganization here at Fresno State. This reorganization was trying to bring together all of the water institutes at Fresno State. There's a pretty impressive collection of water research groups here at the university, and the restructuring makes the California Water Institute effectively the front door to all things water at Fresno State. So this reorganization brought together the Center for Irrigation Technology, which Sarge also mentioned when he introduced himself, the Water Energy and Technology Center, which is a business incubator that focuses on, obviously, water, energy, and ag tech. And you may notice we're having some power problems in my building, so the lights may flicker a bit. And then the third division is what we're calling the Research and Development Division. That is effectively what was CWI. So now we have all of these organizations together under a sort of a single umbrella, which makes it easier for you to get in touch with water-related resources here at Fresno State. And it makes it easier for us to interact with our stakeholders with a common face. There are a couple of exciting opportunities or activities that are happening within CWI right now I wanted to mention. One is some subsurface groundwater research that Cordy Quale has been doing. Cordy was formerly the interim director of the California Water Institute. And he's been working on a novel technology that integrates groundwater recharge under existing orchards. In addition to that, Laura can tell you all about the Water Boot Camp. It'll be happening in May, hosted by CWI. And we are looking forward to a lot of continued stakeholder engagement and education on all things water.
Thanks, Charles. What does AVP mean?
Associate Vice President.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Laura, do you want to talk a little bit about boot camp? Because that was actually one of the findings, was that there needed to be more knowledge. I also want to just notice Bill Atlee's on the line, and this is a topic near and dear to his heart as well from Groundwater Resources Association. So go ahead.
Yes, thank you. So we actually partnered with the World Ag Expo last year to do one in May, which is Water Awareness Month. And it was so successful that we want to do it again this year. And it is very introductory into water. So we go over hydrology, we go over California watersheds, what's headwaters, where water goes to. We go into groundwater recharge. How do we recharge? What does the groundwater look like? All the way to water law, riparian rights versus appropriative rights, and then into SGMA. And so we're finalizing the topics right now, but last year we did 12 topics. We did 3 different Fridays, and we will do that again this May. And we are finalizing the schedule, but we will also be at the World Ag Expo presenting 4 different topics the next week. And they will be, again, how do we move water around California? California has amazing aqueducts and dams and rivers, and just the way we move water around is amazing. And so we will talk about that and talk about the State Water Project versus the Central Valley Project. We will also discuss groundwater. There will be one presentation focused on the subsurface recharge, and then we will also talk about how do you read your GSP? That thing is long. And so how do you look for the key information that you're looking for? So that will be a teaser, which will be at the World Ag Expo in person. The one in May will be virtual.
That's great. Chris, that sounds like another webinar, how to read a GSP. That sounds like
absolutely
consider. Yeah, I want to just quickly note 2 last questions. I've got you for 2 more minutes. One of them was, there's already a request, hey, can we add some more fields to the spreadsheet? So for that one, yeah, Sarge's laughing, but would you be willing to have people mess around and run with that if they wanted to add?
In fact, we got a note from Nell Green Nyland that, right now it's open. We're going to have a way that you can download it yourself and then play around with it so that it isn't open so that people can mess with it way it's set up right now. So we've got to figure that out. But definitely, if there's a consensus, if somebody really we see a groundswell of requests for an addition to it, I think I'd be happy to try and load up additional columns. Otherwise, I think you're going to have to figure out how to do it yourself. Yeah, I'm willing to entertain that. We're going to be looking at it quarterly anyway to make sure that it stays up to date.
Yes, I was going to say, can I jump in here? So
yeah.
the link was actually created view only. So you can only view information, filter it, sort it, search for information, but you can't add columns or anything. But as Sarge said, we are working on it quarterly. So if there's information that you would like us to add or columns that you would like us to add, you can just email Sarge or myself, and we will, as Sarge said, entertain the idea. But at the moment, you aren't able to manipulate the data unless you download it. So the link is for view only. Unless, like I said, you can download it to your computer and manipulate it there. And you can get to the link from our California website, California Water website, or from the publication.
And then once again, this particular crew at Fresno State, they are happy to work with the other researchers. So and now that's a problem when you raise your hand or send a chat, is once we know your name, then we're going to start calling on you and maybe pull you into the mix. So I have one last thing just to close us out, and we're right at the end here, but just one of the questions had been, there were some things where you said, hey, we really need to increase some cooperation. Is there anything in the report that would give some guidance on that, or is that an area for future study?
Yeah, that's a good one. I think that the looking at the ones that are successful by touring them, but I did not highlight giving any grade or anything along those lines to anybody. So it really takes that digging and work. And I think that we all that have been working on it kind of got a feel for some of the ones that are more successful. And then the grades, as we said now, the DWR advice it's going to help, I think, figure some of that out. And I'd be happy to talk to somebody about what they see in the advice or whatever, you know, and give my view. But no, I don't think we're going to add anything like that.
Okay, that's great. Chris, let me turn this back to you. Thank you, audience, for hanging in there. We had a tremendous audience today. Suzanne, I'm so sorry I'm at the end, so I don't have time for one more question, but Chris, take it away. You want to close this out? You're on mute. The classic Zoom.
Okay, sorry about that. I don't really have anything prepared, but thank you everyone for coming. I hope you found it a useful information. The comments in the chat are really, you know, people really found it useful. There will be a follow-up email in the next day or two. We'll include links to the video and all the resources that have been shared in the chat. And so look for that. That'll be sent to everybody who registered, whether you attended or not. So thank you all again for coming, and a big round of thanks to our panel and the great work done at Fresno State. Cheers to you guys. So.
Good stuff. All right. Thanks, Chris. So we'll let everybody head off into their day.